united against Israel on Quds Day. Held on the last Friday of the holy month of Ramadan, the International Quds Day is an annual display of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Millions of Muslims and non-Muslims sympathetic to the Palestinian cause hold rallies across the world to condemn the Israeli occupation and call for the liberation of Palestine.
It's a day of resistance. It's a day to stand with Palestine. It's a day people all over the world recognize the importance of standing in solidarity with Palestine and being for every form of resistance against Zionism and against U.S. imperialism.
The International Quds Day is a legacy of Imam Khomeini, the late founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran. On August 7, 1979, shortly after the victory of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini proclaimed Quds Day as an annual day of solidarity with the legitimate rights of the Muslim people of Palestine.
Quds روز جهانی است. روزی نیست که فقط اختصاص به قدس داشته باشد. روز مقابله مستضعفین با مستکبرین است.
The annual event is an opportunity for all the freedom-seeking people of the world to voice their support for the Palestinian cause and unite against the Israeli aggression.
Wall by wall, apartheid has to fall.
Down with Zionism!
Zionism is terrorism!
Down with Zionism!
What is the significance of the International Quds Day?
The International Quds Day is an opportunity for people around the world to show our solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. For so many people, the Palestinian struggle represents an intertwining of so many issues. The Palestinian struggle is, of course, about freedom and justice and equality for the Palestinian people, but it's also about ending colonialism and imperialism, including, of course, U.S. imperialism, and implementing a world with more just policies and more equality.
This year, because of a global coronavirus pandemic, human rights activists in Iran, the UK, South Africa and elsewhere have planned to replace street rallies with online events. The Quds Day, which falls on May 22nd, is of special importance this year, given US President Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century, which he unveiled in January. The scheme has been widely criticized as a plot to legitimize the Israeli occupation and redraw the Middle East map.
Under this vision, Jerusalem will remain Israel's undivided, very important, undivided capital.
Trump's scheme is totally biased towards Israel, while paying lip service to a Palestinian state with limited control over its own security and borders.
The one thing that's interesting about this so-called deal of the century is it looks like the logical conclusion to Ehud Barak's not so generous offer during the so-called Camp David agreements. If you remember, the big lie that came out of Camp David was that he offered Yasser Arafat 95% of the West Bank, but that Arafat rejected it. This was patently untrue. No such offer was ever made. And Israel has never had any other interest other than dispossessing Arabs of their land, murdering as many of them as they wished, and outright lying to the international community that it cares anything for international law.
The so-called deal of the century calls Jerusalem al-Quds Israel's undivided capital and allows the regime to annex the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. Palestinian leaders say it will only cement Israel's long-standing policy of permanent occupation, colonialism, and apartheid.
You know what the president is saying in his initiative? He is saying that he is giving legitimacy to illegal colonization program in the West Bank. He is giving he is making illegal Jewish presence on the Palestinian territory. He's trying to legalize it. This does not solve the issue.
The International Quds Day offers an opportunity for Muslims to unite against Israeli apartheid and Trump's plan to bolster it.
I think this is a perfect opportunity for the Palestinian cause. I think the goal at this point is to really think creatively and come up with plans for Al-Quds Day that really lift it up in the midst of course, right now there are many social justice causes.
The United States has been Israel's best friend since its illegal creation in 1948. It has supported the regime financially, militarily, and diplomatically. The United States gives Israel $3.8 billion a year, most of which is military aid. As Israel's biggest ally, the United States has vetoed dozens of UN Security Council resolutions that condemn the Israeli regime. The status of Jerusalem Al-Quds has long been the target of US vetoes at the United Nations.
What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten. It's one more example of the United Nations doing more harm than good in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Today, for the simple act of deciding where to put our embassy, the United States was forced to defend its sovereignty. The record will reflect that we did so proudly.
Jerusalem Al-Quds has been designated as occupied under international law since the 1967 Arab War. The entire city is currently under Israeli control, while the regime also claims the city's eastern part, which Palestinians want as the capital of their future state. Why does the United States defy the international consensus on the issue of Al-Quds?
Israel has managed to insinuate itself into American political structures. Especially since Ronald Reagan, Israeli interests have dominated the American government to the point where America can no longer be seen as an independent country. I use the term Is-America literally. I coined the term to show that Israel, through the Israel lobby, particularly AIPAC and other organizations, bullies, bribes, or otherwise blackmails politicians into supporting Israeli interests over the American national interest.
Emboldened by Washington's unconditional support, the Israeli regime continues to oppress the Palestinians through unlawful killings, forced displacement, abusive detention, and expansion of illegal settlements. The regime has committed the most brutal atrocities in Gaza, which has been under a crippling siege since 2007 and witnessed 3 wars since late 2008. Nearly 2,200 Palestinians, including 577 children, were killed during Israel's 50-day onslaught in 2014.
We investigated pretty thoroughly IDF attacks that killed civilians in 3 UN schools that were being used as shelters in the Gaza Strip during the latest conflict. Those attacks on the Beit Hanun school, the Jabalia school, and the Rafah school killed 45 people that we identified as civilians, of whom 17 were children.
Back then, the US Senate unanimously voted to support Israel's right to defend itself, while the regime massacred civilians in Gaza using American weapons. Is the United States complicit in Israeli war crimes against the Palestinians?
The United States has been complicit in Israeli war crimes since 1947. And since then, the United States has been blackmailed, bullied, and bribed by Israel to do its bidding. See, Israel cannot be considered a state in the conventional sense of the word. It's an international gangster community. It has no allies. It has only people that want to be associated with it because Israel represents power to many people. So the United States is like a lot of people who find themselves wanting to be in the company of gangsters. They find them attractive and they willingly support them, and because these gangsters have a lot of money.
Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and his plan to relocate the U.S. Embassy to the Holy City sparked months of angry protests in Gaza and the West Bank. Israeli forces pulled no punches in their brutal crackdown. A United Nations probe said the Israeli regime committed crimes against humanity. Israeli snipers targeted children, health workers and journalists, killing hundreds of Palestinians.
More than 100 snipers were deployed to the border for the planned demonstrations. One protester was shot in the back as he was running away from the border with a tire in his hand. Another man was shot while praying at the protest. The Israeli army is under increasing international pressure to explain why.
About 600,000 Israelis live in over 230 illegal settlements built since the 1967 Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and East Jerusalem al-Quds. The UN Security Council has condemned Israel's settlement activities in several resolutions.
The United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution that demands an end to Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory.
United against Israel on Quds Day. The issue of settlements has long been a stumbling block to the so-called peace negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians. The illegal settlements make it impossible for the Palestinians to form an independent state in the future. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to annex all Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and has set July the 1st for the start of cabinet discussions on the matter.
We will go to the next stage in applying Israeli sovereignty in the settlements. But I don't make a difference between the settlement blocks and the isolated settlements because from my perspective, any point of settlement is Israeli and we have responsibility towards them as the Israeli government. I will not uproot anyone and I will not transfer sovereignty to the Palestinians.
Condemnations have been swift from across the globe. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said the move would shut the door on possible peace negotiations. The Arab League has called it a new war crime. But Netanyahu has a friendly ally in the White House. The State Department said Washington is prepared to recognize Israeli sovereignty over occupied territories.
We're glad that there's a now fully formed government in Israel. As for the annexation in the West Bank, the Israelis will ultimately make those decisions. That's an Israeli decision, and we will work closely with them to share with them our views of this in a private setting.
Netanyahu has said he was confident he would be able to annex the West Bank this summer, with support from the United States. Does Washington's total capitulation to Tel Aviv bolster the Israeli regime's policy of apartheid and permanent occupation?
We realize that this isn't just the United States capitulating to Israel, but this is a U.S. project in itself. And this is playing to Trump's base, and he is igniting his base with this because his base is, a large part of his base is composed of Christian evangelicals, Christian Zionist evangelicals who believe in supporting Israel because they believe that if the Jews repopulate the Holy Land, then there'll be a second coming of Christ and the Armageddon and all kinds of things that make absolutely no sense and are based on violence.
In the United States and around the world, many are questioning why successive U.S. administrations have expressed unconditional support for Israel in the face of unprecedented violations of international law and human rights.
support the security of both Israel and her neighbors.
We have a commitment to the preservation of Israel as a nation.
And the enemies of Israel should have no doubt that regardless of party, Americans stand shoulder to shoulder in our commitment to Israel's security.
This is a two-way relationship that has real benefits for both our nations.
We know that day will come, and when it does, the United States of America will be at your side.
US President Donald Trump has taken the support to a whole new level.
Frankly, Mr. President, given all that you have already done for Israel, I'm not surprised. You have been the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House.
Why is there such strong bipartisan support for Israel in Washington? Many observers say it's because of the power of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States, especially the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC. The lobby group has effectively hijacked US policy in the Middle East. AIPAC acts as an agent of the Israeli regime and has a stranglehold on the US Congress.
It cannot be considered an American legislature. In fact, all members of Congress have to sign a loyalty oath to support Israel. Now you tell me, what country has signed a loyalty oath to a foreign power and called itself an independent state? Representative Cynthia McKinney refused to sign, and she ended up being forced out of office in the next election. So we cannot talk about the United States as a republic.
During the 2014 Israeli war on Gaza, AIPAC pushed a resolution in Congress to affirm Israel's right to defend itself, while the regime ruthlessly killed civilians in Gaza. The lobby is also very active in smearing politicians who dare to defend Palestinian rights. How does the Israel lobby operate?
The Israel lobby controls campaign funding, and that's what most politicians, and as well as insinuating itself into major areas of the economy and other power structures. Israelis or pro-Israeli Americans dominate the media, they dominate industry, government, every aspect of society that would influence people's thinking.
The United States has been pursuing a very hawkish foreign policy in the Middle East, all on behalf of the Israeli regime. The Trump administration withdrew from a multinational nuclear agreement with Iran and imposed the most draconian sanctions against the Islamic Republic over fabricated Israeli lies.
After 3 days of listening to world leaders praise the nuclear deal with Iran, I begin my speech today by saying, ladies and gentlemen, check your enthusiasm at the door. You see, this deal doesn't make peace more likely. By fueling Iran's aggressions with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, it makes war more likely.
Early in January, the US assassinated Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force of Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, along with his companions in Baghdad. The cowardly act of terror was taken on the direct order of Donald Trump.
Well, the assassination of General Soleimani was like pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, reckless and dangerous. And it is part of U.S. imperialism, U.S. demand to control the entire world, but in this case, specifically the Middle East. And of course, that has similarities to Israel's occupation and system of apartheid, which is also a project of imperialism. It's often said that Israel acts as an outpost for the U.S. in the Middle East, and I think that's quite accurate. An outpost of colonialism and imperialism.
The martyred general was a forefront figure in the regional battle against foreign-backed terrorists. The assassination plot was carried out with the help of Israeli intelligence. General Soleimani had been on Israel's list of assassination targets for years.
President Trump deserves all the credit for acting swiftly, forcefully, decisively. Israel stands with the United States in its just struggle for peace, security, and self-defense.
Soleimani has been described as the martyr of Quds, as he devoted his life to supporting the Palestinian people's struggle against Israel.
With respect to Palestine, the United States has never been an honest broker and never could be. It was always Israel's billy club. So if we want to talk about the United States as an independent country and why it doesn't obey international law, we have to look at influences working on the president and Congress. So many members of Congress are so bought and paid for by Israel that it cannot be considered an American legislature. In fact, all members of Congress have to sign a loyalty oath to support Israel. Now you tell me, what country has to sign a loyalty oath to a foreign power and call itself an independent state?
Despite extensive lobbying by pro-Israel organizations, the sentiment towards Israel is shifting in America and other countries, especially among the younger people. Opinion polls show that Americans are increasingly critical of Israel. International solidarity with Palestinians has gathered steam in recent years. The Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement, or BDS, is one of the popular global campaigns against the Israeli regime.
BDS is short for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. It's a movement to get individuals and institutions to withdraw their money and support from Israel. The goal being to pressure Israel to end its illegal occupation, settlement building, and attacks on Palestinians.
Many universities, trade unions, NGOs, and human rights groups in Europe and North America have joined the movement since it was launched in 2005. BDS supporters say that in urging businesses and universities to cut ties with Israel, they are using non-violent means to resist the Israeli occupation and aggression.
BDS is perhaps the most effective weapon against Israel because it hits them where it lives, in their pocketbook. You interrupt Israeli trade, you destroy Israel's alleged image as a democratic state, and Israel has very little defense against it. Particularly when Jews, American and European Jews, join the BDS movement, Israel faces a genuine challenge to its legitimacy. BDS movements are political. I mean, the right of a country to say, we choose not to deal with you, or the right of a person to say, I will not buy from the store because it offends my sense of morality.
The Israeli regime has been trying very hard to discredit the grassroots movement.
Israel perceives BDS as having a very serious strategic impact on its entire regime of oppression because Israel, and as well as we do, see the South African president as very important. We see the US civil rights movement and the power of boycotts in that movement in affecting serious change. At the academic level, the cultural level, and increasingly at the economic level, Israel's isolation is increasing around the world. They see the writing on the wall, and so do we.
Why are such movements becoming increasingly popular in the West?
The decision of individual freedom. And Israel is deathly afraid of individual freedom. Right now, the lie of Israel's legitimacy has been exploded. The internet has picture upon picture and video upon video of Israeli atrocities, such as shooting children for sport, or beating up people in the street, or sniping children on their way to school.